All right, so we're live, I guess, and this is Subsurface Talks, the podcast about Blender, 3D, 3D graphics, the meaning of life, you name it, all things creative, in digital art and art in general. So today I'm super excited to have a special guest, Mr. Jason Van Gumster. You might know his book Blender for Dummies or any other of his countless endeavors in the internet, or maybe you've met him on one of the Blender conferences, which I'm hoping we'll talk about a little bit in this episode. So, hello, Jason. Welcome to the show.
Hi there. How are you doing?
I'm fine. And can you
Yay.
introduce yourself to the audience? Like, tell
I
a
should
little bit
probably
more
do that.
about what you do.
Yeah, I'm Jason Van Gumster. I am I think been referring to myself recently as a one of the Blender old farts. I've been using Blender itself since 1998, so before it was open source. And yeah, I've been around the block for a little while, using it for everything from I ran a small animation studio. I used I used Blender to help design anti-counterfeit security for currency, so I fought bad guys with art. I and now, most recently, I am the director of marketing and director of special projects for Autotroph, which is the parent company for CG Cookie, Blender Market, and Orange Turbine.
Great. So probably some people know CG Cookie or Blender Market, and they might not have heard about the Orange Turbine or Autotroph, the company that's behind all of these. And great to have you here. And I guess we'll talk about the less known parts
Sure.
of Autotroph's activities.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to shed some light on this. Yeah, the show is called Subsurface Talks, so I hope to get like beneath the surface of what we can see online officially, and of course, no NDA information if anything's like secret, you know.
Absolutely.
So maybe let's start off with telling a little bit about the history of how you got into 3D. Like you said, it was like back in the 90s, so really like ancient history of 3D, I guess,
Yes,
for
like
most people know.
way ancient history. I yeah. So I started when I was in my teens. I had this idea that I was going to be an aeronautical engineer, and so I started playing with a bunch of different 3D software, which admittedly mid 90s there wasn't early to mid 90s there wasn't a whole lot. And so I played with everything from oh wow, True Space to I can't remember, I think 3D Studio had come out, not 3D Studio Max. It was still running in DOS. And of course, CAD packages, AutoCAD, and whatever I could sort of get my hands on. And then when I went to university, college stuff, I made I want to say the questionable decision of not choosing a single degree track. I actually ended up studying computer engineering and they called it kinetic imaging, which is animation, sound design, film, and video, all sort of bundled into one. And so those are two, like one's a fine arts track, one's a engineering track, and I did both of those at the same time, which I don't really recommend. But I had a lot of fun. I was there for a second, and I ended up doing that. And so as I was sort of working through those things, I started using Linux as my primary operating system. But in the art school, which worked fine in the engineering school, but in the art school, they're like, well, what tools are you using for that? And so I had to find things that would work in Linux so I could do my work. And at the time, I found Blender, which was the not a number version of Blender. Actually, it was the Neo Geo and then not a number version of Blender. And I started working with it and playing with it. Didn't have undo. That was exciting. But ultimately it went open source and I sort of just rode along with it. And as I graduated, I started an animation studio doing basically local television production stuff, small film, a little bit of visual effects, not a whole lot of that, and a little bit of industrial visualization and helping with manufacturing. basically Blender gets used in all sorts of crazy ways, and so I started using it to help people in all sorts of crazy ways, and sort of that sort of started that trajectory into those sort of things, and then getting more and more involved with the Blender community. And I wrote for Blender Nation for a second. I'm still actually moderating on Blender Artists, and given a couple talks at different beacons, which I try to go to every year. I haven't hit every single one of them, but I'm in the double digits in terms of attendance, so I'm feeling pretty good about that.
Yeah, that's exciting. I guess I'll have a few questions about this because I've only been to 2 conferences till now, and yeah, I guess it's interesting for anyone who's been to this conference at least once, and how it's been back in the days when Blender wasn't like that popular as it's now. So I guess we'll dig into that during the show. And I'm thinking
Yeah.
like your history is. You said that you don't recommend this kind of like uh, seemingly not fitting areas of study. But I guess
Yeah,
it's kind of fitting to what you do and how you approach things, and it kind of like naturally blends into Blender.
it
Blender
does.
being
It
called like
does.
the Swiss knife, like a tool for
Yes.
everything.
Yeah, and it does fit into that. I mean, I say it that way, but I don't recommend. It's maybe it's a little hypocritical of me. I did it. I wouldn't do it differently, but I don't necessarily recommend anybody else ever to follow my footsteps on that. Basically, what it comes down to is I have a lot of interests. I want to do as many different possible things as possible, and so I rather than choosing one thing to specialize in, I chose as broad as I could go, to do as many different things as possible. And even in those disciplines, I chose broadly, right? So when you talk about engineering, I got into computer engineering because if you do computer engineering, you can do programming. You can do, if you start working with microprocessors, you could do uh, chemical engineering for the actual creation of the microprocessors. You can get into robotics, which gets you into mechanical engineering. The whole sort of gamut of engineering is covered. You can cover that with computer engineering. Likewise, by getting into animation, you're already talking about sound design and film and these sort of things. But animation, you can touch every creative media possible, right? You can draw, you can sculpt, you can do each and every one of these things. And so I want to do everything, and I understand how unrealistic that is and how time consuming it can be. But I want to, and so that's sort of what drove that decision, and really, sort of, I'll say fortuitously, Blender fits really well with that because of all the different ways it gets used, not just in creative spaces, but also in more technical spaces as well. And it's been one of those things where a lot of people who will start with Blender and move on to something else because they start specializing in something that they're very much interested in. I have still yet to specialize, and so I've been able to sort of just hang out with Blender for quite the time.
Yeah, I'm loving this kind of thread that we're going through because it hits my personal chord because I've struggled with this kind of approach a lot, like finding myself being the jack of all trades and not really being a specialist in any particular area that much. Like
It's true.
because of like the studies and did interior design back in the days, and it is kind of like a broad area in terms of arts. You have to like do a little bit of drawing, do a little bit of 3D computers, or
Exactly.
a little bit of architecture, a little bit of art, fine arts. Uh,
The
and
one thing I
I
do.
also played. I
Oh,
also played music. I
there
did
you go. Yeah.
a little bit of everything, and I kind of found it like a disadvantage in terms of being nowhere, like really nowhere, everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And once I went to a kind of like training of, I think it was a Rhino training for CAD, because I was doing at that time, I was doing some work with production of point of sales kind of stuff, like furniture for shops. And we needed that program. And the guy asked me about what I'm doing with the programs. I mentioned Blender, and he said, "Oh yeah, you're kind of like broad interest, and this is great because companies right now need this kind of stuff, like these kind of people who kind of know a little bit of that and something from a totally different world. So like these kind of generalist people, they also kind of like have a value in the market. And
It's true.
I'm telling that because I want to jump into Orange Turbine, which I feel that this personality of yours and this experience of many different things fits
Yeah,
greatly into what you do in
it
Orange
it it,
Turbine. I know.
it does. It fits. Actually, I was worried early on when doing this that I was making myself pathologically unemployable, which despite being employed, I'm still kind of convinced I'm not employable. But what having all these different sort of interests and like pursuing them with that kind of gusto, you start seeing connections between things that aren't obvious if you're a specialist, right? You're not going to think to look at another way of working, um, because you've never been exposed to it. But if you and this is when I teach, one of the things that I would tell students is that if they're trying to be, say, an animator, look to other media to make your work better. Go to a theater, go to see live performance, because that will inform your work even better. Even if it's still in the creative realm, but just thinking in a different media is going to make your work stand out more and say something a little bit differently than what everything else is doing. But you wanted to talk about Orange Turbine.
Yeah. So first, maybe you could introduce the whole idea. Like, what's the idea behind Orange Turbine? What it's doing? Like, what's its mission? And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
people know. Like,
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that happened, and this actually goes back to the Blender Foundation and those sort of things. Blender Foundation is, their Blender Foundation, Blender Studio. Their job is to make Blender and make stuff with Blender. And then sort of one makes the thing, and one proves the case of making the thing. But despite having grown in popularity and having more developers and having more staff to do things, their main focus is still on developing Blender. They don't necessarily have the bandwidth and or the interest. I think some of them have an interest in it, but mostly it's about the bandwidth to provide consulting, custom tooling, support, those kinds of things. And that's why the foundation teamed up with Ubuntu for desktop support and those sort of things. And so um, Ton would get these emails regularly saying, "Hey, we need custom tooling. We need someone to do a workshop. We need uh, these sort of things." And he would, he'll refer that out to people and do those sort of things. And he's always said there is a business opportunity here for someone to start offering these sort of consulting services to studios and tool makers and those sorts of things. And ultimately, what happened is that uh, the folks at Autotroph, formerly CG Cookie. So I should back up a little bit. CG Cookie is sort of what everything was, but it was really starting to get confusing when you talked about CG Cookie, the company that owns other things, and then CG Cookie, the education platform. So to make things more clear, the umbrella company got renamed to Autotroph. And so now Autotroph is the sort of parent for CG Cookie and Orange Turbine and Blender Market. And so Jonathan and Wes from Autotroph were like, okay, we'll try out this consulting thing, and we need somebody to do it. And they asked me, and so yeah, my job is to one of my jobs, I guess, at this point is to grow Autotroph as a business. And Autotroph is it's a firm for uh, providing consultation to studios, pipelines, and actually we're starting to work with individuals on starting on using Blender, integrating into pipelines. Basically, Orange Turbine is not a studio. We're not going to do your work for you, but we will help you do your work better and faster. And so I end up I do everything from doing live workshops, remote workshops, custom tooling, software like add-ons for Blender. Haven't yet had to patch Blender, but that's also on the table for doing those sort of things. One of the things I'm really eager to do more of is encourage studios that we consult for to send patches back upstream to Blender proper. And because I've been in the Blender community as long as I have, I like to think I can maybe help sort of guide them through the patch process, because the patch review process can be a little bit of a tedious thing to work your way through, trying to figure out which developer you're supposed to talk to about these sorts of things. And so I like to imagine that at one point I could be a sort of a patch Sherpa that helps with that. But those are the sort of things, and I'll say one of the surprising things that came out of this was, we started this thinking about consulting for studios, like studios that are trying to adopt Blender into their pipeline, and that's still a big part of what we focus on. But it turns out that tool makers want to integrate with Blender too, and while these tool makers, we'll talk like for instance, Adobe or Roblox are the two biggest examples I have. They've got great people on staff that are fantastic 3D modelers, 3D artists, and of course the technical staff is fantastic as well. But they're all Maya people or 3ds Max people. 90% plus of their customers are Blender users. And so in order to be able to support their customers, they have to learn how to use Blender. And so I ended up giving workshops on that to them so that they could better support their customers. And so that was like a really cool sort of surprising revelation that we had going forward with that. And so that's been a lot of fun.
That's great to hear. Like it's been happening. Like I've been using Blender a little bit shorter. Like I started, I think, in 2008. So I think it was like around 2.49 version or something like that. So not that old, but back in the day when I started, like Blender was really considered like a tool for hobbyists more than anything serious. Though it was pretty powerful at the time. Even when you look back, it was a pretty powerful tool, but it was kind of like looked upon as something free, something for hobbyists, and not something serious to be used in a serious business, right? So I'm wondering whether you still get this kind of approach when contacting people from companies, or is that already a thing of the past?
So actually, I will say that you see that response more now from individuals than you do from companies. Companies don't care as long as they're allowed to use it. It's legally safe, and um, it does the job. They care a lot less. It's individuals at this point that think about like standards or prestige, or this is the latest, greatest, best, whatever. I mean, half the studios are using versions of software that's 3 years old because they don't want to change to fix it. So using the latest and greatest isn't necessarily the biggest thing on their window. That's not the thing that they're super interested in. They want to get the job done, and they want to get it done reliably. And so you don't run into that as much with studios. In fact, you'll see Blender get used now as like the test case or the starting point when new technology is coming out, or there's like, I need to test this in something. Well, I'm going to test in Blender because I can get it and I can use it. And this happens not just in the academic space, but also uh, in commercial space, right? So you'll see when they're talking about the ASWF is doing things with OpenUSD and OpenVDB and these sort of things. And they're talking, Blender is like one of the things they talk about in those conversations, because they want it to be able to, that's the one that they can start playing with and working with and getting it to integrate with. And so it's at this, one of the biggest difference I've noticed now is that when talking about support for work or doing work, it used to be, it would be, they would talk about something and you'd have to ask, well, okay, so is this something I can do with Blender? You don't have to ask anymore. Usually they say Blender's just along the list of other things that are being supported, which is really, really kind of, it shows how far, I don't think, partially I think it shows how far Blender has come, because Blender, even back when you started using it, it was being used professionally. They just didn't talk about it. And oftentimes it was because it was being used in other departments, sort of clandestinely, because you didn't have to install it. You don't have to be as clandestine about the usage of it anymore. And I think so the the industry side of the 3D part of it has sort of matured in that regard, and I think that the community as well has really matured in such a way that it's not looked at as, you know, a bunch of kids in riffraff, you know, trying to mess with everybody else's fun toys.
Yeah, I think like this process was kind of like also like helped with the advent of subscription based software, like the software as service, that became kind of like a trap that people became really annoyed by the need of having a subscription for everything and not really having the control over the software.
Yeah, we used to
I've even
talk.
like
So we used to talk a whole lot, you know, because I got myself also really involved with open source stuff, and we used to talk a lot about like vendor lock-in, and you know, if the stuff you create, you can only create within that ecosystem, and once they take it away, you don't have it. Well, when you have perpetual licenses, you know, the response is, well, they can't take it away. I have the software, I have it installed, unless it becomes not able to run on my OS, then they can't take it away. Well, hello to subscriptions. Unless you keep paying your monthly fee, you don't have your files. I mean, you have your files, but you can't really do anything with them because they're a closed format. Um, they've gotten a little bit better. Like I will say, USD, for instance, has gotten to be sort of a first-class citizen in a lot of these tools, which makes interchange a lot better. Not perfect because there's, you know, some features just aren't supported from one platform to another, but um, it's been really, really, I'll say, good and bad, right? Subscriptions, lower barrier to entry, but they are a kind of a money grab. So there's that trade-off there. And then because people are annoyed with subscriptions, it's seen a lot more interest in open source stuff that you don't have to have that sort of thing. And so it's been sort of gratifying to sort of not really even be on the sidelines, but sort of be in the muck as all of that's been happening.
and there's like the additional problem of forced updates when you have like the subscription service or even like cloud software or whatever. You just like have to update when the update comes out. And like I find people in Blender, when the new version comes out, like everyone's like, there are two kinds of Blender users. Like one part is like they're already using the alpha version or whatever, like playing with the new shiny toys, and the other ones are kind of like, well, hold your horses, let's wait until the patches come out, everything like stabilized.
Yep.
And they are used to having everything stable. But the fun thing with Blender is that you can have whatever version you want to use, and you can have them side by side on the same system. There's no problem with that.
Nope.
So
Yeah,
I've
I
seen
love
like
that.
a lot of complaint in other softwares where people were kind of like annoyed by having to deal with the update stuff, forced updates.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the really that flexibility, being able to downgrade, upgrade, or, you know, in my case, compile from source every other day and play with that. Yeah, that's you don't have that with a lot of other, especially on the proprietary side of things. You don't have access to that unless you have special deals, which most of us don't have uh that kind of access to have such special deals.
Yeah, I recently used this version, like download a version of Blender feature. I was doing like a little bit of a workshop for young kids in school, primary school, and they had like the really old computers. Like maybe they weren't very old, but these were like typical, office desktops with integrated graphics cards. So like really something that wouldn't support the latest version. But I just checked a few versions back. It wasn't really that much different. Like Blender, I think 3.2 went well, and it gave a warning that the card might not work, but it worked. So
Yep. Yeah,
it's a,
fantastic.
it's a luxury. You can run it on a toaster, really.
There
if you
and there and
if
there
you just try.
people still do the like the Blender 2.4 challenge or whatever, where they'll download, you know, the oldest version of Blender they can get that will run on their computer and see if they can model something.
Yeah, that's a nice challenge. Um, so You said a little bit about the other things that you do. I wanted to ask you one more question about this. Handling a lot of different topics. Like I checked that you even published your own books,
I
or
did.
like a lot of different stuff that we can talk about for hours, I guess. And I'm just curious about how you find balance in this madness because it's
I
really hard
think,
to manage a lot of things going on at the same time.
well, I don't sleep a whole lot. No, I think this sort of multifaceted bit of chaos is my version of balance. If I don't do a bunch of things, I get kind of stir crazy, and so I tend to, if I if I'm in a sort of like, I at one point I was in a more corporate environment, and I was habitually thinking outside my scope, which yeah, didn't make a lot of friends that way, but it worked out for the most part, I think. But so yeah, doing a bunch of different things is what I do for that. So yeah, I, in addition to doing the stuff for Autotroph, um I still actually do some of the stuff for the currency, and I do write, and so I write fiction and other goofy things related to that, and then because I write that, and I self-publish it. I know the whole process for self-publishing and marketing books and those sort of things, and so I ended up writing a little web app also to help monitor those things, and I've actually just sort of been soft launching that for the last year or so, where it does fun and interesting things that is not all related to Blender or any of those things, but it's a little bit of web development type side of things, because I have a personal philosophy that while I like to do a bunch of different things, if I find myself doing the same thing more than, say, 3 times in a row, I'm going to automate it. I'm going to find a way to automate it. And that works on the animation side of things and Blender related stuff, but also works with like stuff I'm doing at the house and stuff that I'm doing with writing, whatever. Is that if I can take something that I know is I I could spend my time better doing something else, then the stuff that I can automate, I will, because I can't afford to hire somebody to do it for me.
Yeah, so uh, that's the way of the future, let's say. To just hand over what's possible to machines and just focus on what's fun.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious about the one part that I found online about your ventures. Uh, it was like not just doing a lot of things from different areas, but also like being everywhere. I mean, the functionally homeless project. So that
Yes.
you can
So
you tell
yeah.
us about how this crazy idea came to your head, and how did you convince your family to go along?
Oh, that was a harder one. So yeah, just to fill everybody in, I travel full time. I'm a full time it'll actually be in October, 3 months, 3 years, 3 years of traveling full time. So 3 years ago, my family and I, we sold our house, almost everything in it, bought a motorhome, Class A motorhome, big bus style thing, and started driving around the U.S. And we've been doing that for 3 years. And we'd always sort of had this goal. Like, I grew up as a military brat, so I've been traveling basically all my life. I don't really have like, this place is home, and it's just, I've been traveling. And so one of the things that traveling, as much as I did as a kid, does is sort of, and maybe this is sort of where all of this started, is it exposes you to all sorts of different things, different cultures, different places to be, different types of people, different information, right? It's just like having a bunch of interests and things you do. Be going to a lot of different places informs that, and you get to see a lot of those things. And um I wanted to expose my kids to that, but I'm doing too many other things right now. I wasn't really going to enlist myself in the military to get them that, so I had to find another way. And we were actually on a road trip to see my wife's family, and sort of had had talked about ways that we could go about doing it, and we talked about, like, sort of doing like Airbnbs for like a few months at a time in a bunch of different places and trying that out. And the idea of getting a motorhome, like, I've camped, like actual camping outside in tents or just under a tarp or whatever, but I've never done the RV thing. But the idea came up, and we were on a 12-hour drive talking about it on the way there. And with those conversations, and actually we had talked about it a little bit a few years before, but the numbers, math wise, it just didn't work out. It just didn't make sense because those machines are not cheap. Um, but on the 12-hour drive back, we started running a few numbers, and it turns out that the house that we lived in, the value on it had gone up kind of strangely a lot. And so all of a sudden the numbers started making a lot more sense, and we're like, oh, okay. So we did that drive, and then I would say 3 weeks later we ended up buying the RV. 3 months later, everything was sold and we were on the road, um, and figuring out whatever else. And so, yeah, while we were doing that, we came up with the name Functionally Homeless, to describe what exactly because ultimately it's not that different of a lifestyle from anything else, right? You still wake up, you still go to work, you still have food and do those sort of things. It's I refer to it as kind of like life on an amplifier. So your peaks way higher, but when things go sideways and pear shaped, the troughs so much lower. They're so and so it is it's not without its challenges, but we've been very much enjoying it for quite some time. I'm actually currently not in the motorhome because in the course of all of that, we did accidentally end up buying a house, which is another strange and long story. But so we actually do that, and ended up most of the year is being rented out to folks. Periodically we show up and make sure it's not broken or on fire.
Mm. It's like I'm getting like a lot of Hobbit vibes in that story. Like you just go out the door and hit the road, but then you feel the need to come back to some kind of like base,
It was
house under the
very
hill.
weird. Yeah, about a year ago, the family was getting a little, like, kind of antsy. And one of the things that when you're on the road, we didn't realize until about a year and a half in, that we'd gotten really close. Like my two kids got really close, much closer than they had before we got on the road. And so as a family unit, we gotten really cool and tight. But then we realized, you're missing community, you're missing other people. And it turns out that there's an organization, at least in the States, of other families that travel full time. And so we started connecting with them, and like having big get-togethers with them, and or crossing paths with them, making friends, and then traveling either to the same destinations and crossing paths, or traveling along with them. And that has become uh, a really cool component of that. So we do start socializing and having friends and having a community. I'm a little spoiled in our family because being part of the Blender community, I don't have to be anywhere because Blender community is everywhere. But my wife and kids don't necessarily have that benefit, so we made it a point to do those sort of things. But last year we um, we didn't catch up with as many other people, and so they needed something to have that kind of a grounding, just a ground base. And the irony is that the second that we had the house, the second that we had a place to sort of point at and say that's our house, everybody in the family's like, sweet, let's go. And we're back on the road. And so yeah, we literally we got the place and then left and didn't come back for another 9 months.
Nice. So one more question about this that I have prepared is, did you have like this? this kind of like best experience? Like what would be the best place to live in the United States? So
Oh,
you've seen them all.
that's such a hard question. That's such a difficult question. I will say that the place that we purchased the house is in Utah. And the reason we like being outside. We like doing going around and doing things. And uh, we had actually the first time we came into the state, we crossed in from Wyoming, which is from the north, and the second that we crossed into the state, we're still on the interstate, we're still on the main road, but off the side of it, I could see, I saw people kayaking in a stream, I saw mountain bikers, I saw people hiking up on a hill, and I saw a tent way in the distance. I'm like, what's going on here? And so this is obviously a place we need to find out more about. And so we have found that we really enjoy uh, Utah, though I have to say, on the eastern side of the U.S., we really like trees. I mean, trees are great. I love me some trees. So there, we end up traveling across the country. The 2,000 miles across the country. Almost we've done that almost every year, which is not great for gas mileage, but it's a really good way to recharge and again see as much as possible and do those sort of things. In fact, uh, even on our first year, I took we took the whole family to Amsterdam for the Blender conference in October. And so, in addition to seeing stuff in the U.S., they've been able to travel and see things in Europe and a little bit in Canada. So we're going to do more of that, I think, because I think like my oldest is already talking about like parts of Asia that he wants to see. So I'm pretty stoked about that.
Yeah, so still a part of the world to see. Then there's Australia,
Yes, there is. Yeah, there's.
So,
I got
another
a
stuff.
long list.
Yeah, so you touched upon the Blender conference, so I guess we can jump into that a little bit.
Sure.
Let's start maybe with the latest fresh, the fresh one that's already happened, and it was the first one that happened ever, which was the Blender conference in Los Angeles. Like me being from Europe, I guess I had the first time to understand the FOMO that some people from the US might have with the Amsterdam conference. That it's quite far, it's expensive to travel across the ocean and stuff. So some people just like they don't go because of that, and some people from Europe just couldn't go to the United States to
Yeah.
this first ever Blender conference. Like, how was it?
So going to as many of we'll say Blender Conference Europe, Blender Conference Amsterdam, Blender Conference proper. I'm not sure what to call them. Now, if there's more than one, how do you call them now? But the main Blender Conference, going to as many of those as possible. For anybody who hasn't gone, it's worth going to. Number one, it's the huggiest conference I've ever gone to. There's friendly hugs. It's good times. Now, if you don't want to be hugged, they'll respect that too. But just the sense of friendliness there, and it's a very sort of comfortable and cozy and safe kind of feeling that you don't feel at any other event. Other events will feel this veneer of professionalism or whatever on front of them. Not to say that the Blender Conference isn't professional. It's just it's a lot more personable, and it is my favorite event to go to of the year, hands down. And so we really wanted to capture that for BCon LA. We really wanted to make that happen, and so we being Autotroph put together BCon LA, and so we spent a lot of time talking to folks, to Francesco and Ton, about how they go about doing the main Blender conference, and the different logistics they go through for doing that. And we very much, because there have been other Blender related events around the world other than the Blender conference, right? There has been like the World Blender Meetup Day, which is a virtual event. There's a big event that happens, I think, in Brazil. There've been a couple small little like get-togethers in the U.S. and in Montreal, and in North America. So in Montreal and in New York, there's the Los Angeles Blender Users Group. So there's a bunch of these things that have been happening, but as a conference that's sort of officially recognized by the Blender Foundation, there hasn't been that before. And one of the things we're working on is trying to templatize that so that other people can have their own beacon wherevers. Because yeah, it's hard to get to Amsterdam from outside of Europe. I mean, it can be hard to get there from inside Europe, but it's definitely hard to get there from outside of Europe if you're coming from Asia, if you're coming from North America, if you're coming from South America. Um, Getting to Amsterdam is difficult. And we chose for this first one, we chose Los Angeles because relative to Amsterdam, Los Angeles is about as far as you can get away from Amsterdam before you start heading back there. At least North America, and still stay in North America. And so that's sort of the reason why, because there are a lot of people from like the western coast of the U.S. And just also like Mexico and like Canada that don't go to Amsterdam because it's just too far. And the unfortunate thing is that that western coast of North America happens to also be where a lot of like media and entertainment industry who would like to use more Blender or talk about Blender or talk to other Blender heads about what they do. They'd like to do it, but they don't have the time, bandwidth, or money to fly all the way across the country and then across the ocean to do that. And so we really wanted to do what we could to serve those people and really give the beacon experience to more people. And I like to think we did okay. I haven't heard much in like there we had some technical glitches. I'm still a little upset with the fact that we didn't get some of the video that dropped out, but the community really came together for us. And the people whose live talks didn't get recorded or like the audio was messed up, they either re-edited or reproduced the whole talk for us, and that's on the CG Cookie YouTube channel, and so that's been really really useful. And so yeah, I really enjoyed it. I want to do it again. I have to convince some folks that we should do it again next year as opposed to later, but we'll see. I want it to happen because it's if we can get that going on a regular cadence, then it will very quickly become it'll become my second favorite event of the year. Unless I start doing really really well, then it'll be the first. But I really enjoyed being a part of putting that together and having the people that don't normally make it out to Amsterdam being able to have those conversations and talk to them about that.
Yeah, I guess like my first beacon was just after the pandemic, when the first beacon happened after that, and it was bigger than it used to be. I guess like people who went to the previous ones, like they were all kind of shocked because it was the bigger venue, everything went bigger, Blender got bigger, more interest of all the people. And I found that this was like very very good for me in terms of like feeling in the inside of the Blender community, especially after the pandemic where everything was kind of like put online. Everyone was working online, everything was remote, and then being able to really meet people face to face, it was like a totally different experience.
It's
I really loved it.
it's one of my favorite things. I am I am despite appearances, I guess, I'm actually kind of introverted. Being out and socializing and talking to people that can be pretty draining on me, actually. But the value of having one-on-one conversations with people and really being able to interact with them in meet space is uh, there's nothing that compares to that. Um, we wouldn't even be able to have this conversation, I don't think, unless we met in person at Beacon, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Those kinds of interactions, there's something there that's more than just the words and body language that's coming across. There's and it's not just like physical connection, right? But there is a physiological response. There's a uh, I don't know, it just feeds the soul. It's just really, really something that um, being able to And the best thing about, I think, also the Blender conference is that you get people from, even if it's hard, you have people from all over the world showing up to this thing, and they're from all over the world doing all sorts of crazy different things with Blender, but they're in the same room and they're talking to each other and having these conversations about this one little bit of software that we all use in different ways that we really enjoy using. There's magic there.
Yeah, exactly. You're right about the whole world. Like I've met one of my previous guests was from Colombia, uh, Andres, who does the B4 artists fork of Blender. He was also like he managed to go to Amsterdam, but it was a big challenge for him. He kind of like went full on because he didn't want like he gave a talk
Yeah,
last
he was
year.
he's super cool. I hopefully he'll be able to go again this year. I haven't heard one way or the other, but he was actually a really fun one to talk to in person last year.
Exactly, all across the world, really. Like even guys from Australia,
Yes.
they also some of them could get to Amsterdam, which is also like a beautiful city, though. So if anyone is like hesitating, like you can go there even just to see the museums or the canals,
Yeah,
the city, the architecture. So much to see.
there's a lot of it. It's a fantastic little city for sure.
All right, so I also wanted to ask about the Blender conference thing. You mentioned like the other events, like we had one event two times I've attended here locally in Poland. There's not a lot of these events here. Like they are smaller. It takes someone to really organize this kind of stuff. Yeah, but we had some nice guests. Like we had Gleb Alexandrov coming, so some people went from all across the country here, and we met here in the north of Poland. But here, the person who organized it was Piotr Arłukowicz, a guy who kind of like made a lot of tutorials in Blender back in the days, like whole course online. And he was like also like a diehard fan of Blender conferences. I think he went to most of them. Uh, and he mentioned the difference between the ones that were happening now. Like they still got this vibe of as I said, friendly approach, but he said like the back in the day it was even more tight. Like if you have any kind of like memory of how it used to be when it was really like just a bunch of nerds
Oh yeah,
hanging
like
around
the
WA.
the first Blender conference that I went to, they were still in, and I'm gonna botch the Dutch pronunciation for it. It's in De Vac, is this castle type thing in close to the center of Amsterdam, and I mean, we were pretty much only on the top floor. There were some things that were going down in some of the smaller floors, but it was a room, maybe. Uh, it's hard to give a visualization for. It wasn't big. I think you couldn't fit more than 100 people in there, if that. And even then, that would be tight. And you get a bunch of, and you have to walk up these spiral stairs. That spiraled all the way around the thing to get to the top of it, and you're standing there, and but you're seeing it's still like really, really one-on-one, sort of this intimate setting where you want to talk to the developer that's working on your favorite feature. They're there. You want to see somebody who's doing something kind of wild and crazy. They're doing it. Sometimes they're doing it there. One of my favorite like memories of this was we were still in that small space, and there was an evening event where it was just after Elephant's Dream, so Project Orange, the first open movie project, came out, and so they'd done a presentation on that, and uh, Bassam Kadali and Andy Grauchik, they sort of teamed up for a very sort of, we'll say, an unconventional presentation, wherein Bassam would start rigging a character, or something. I would go back up. Andy would start modeling a character and stop part of the way through, and then Bassam would start rigging it, and then stop part of the way through, and then Andy would continue to do modeling on it based on whatever changed, and then Bassam would start rigging, or start animating with the rig, and so Andy would then have to start modeling and texturing on something that's already moving. And this was back. This is quite some time ago, when Blender still had the ability to be kind of not blocking. You could do that kind of weirdness with Blender, and people were doing it live. And I mean, there wasn't any conversation. They had music going on in the background, and you're just sitting there watching them do this weird sort of art installation kind of crazy thing live, working on Blender. There were lots of little bits and pieces like that were happening pretty regularly, and it was those experiences are those experiences, and then being sort of the sidetrack, yeah, the hallway track, where basically you sit down and you just talk to people about what they do, who they are, stuff related to Blender, or just what's going on with your life. I travel full time, or whatever. Being able to have those conversations and just really sort of connect with people. The last Blender conference I went to this last year, I think I went to like 3 talks. Most of my time I was spent sort of talking to the 700 different people that were there, because it's gotten that big, about whatever, reconnecting with people that I'd already met, or running into people that I hadn't met, or meeting new people that I not even knowing what they were doing, and just sort of like, oh, you're that person. Wow. That's where I spent most of my time in the most recent conferences, is having those conversations, because I find them to be really, really energizing, and really, really, like I said, valuable, really, really useful. And then not like the cynical sort of like, this is useful to me kind of thing, but more like, like it feeds my inner nerd.
Yeah, I'd say the same. Like I went 2 times. The first one was really, I just kind of looked around and how it works. I went to quite a lot of talks. Also tried this talking in between with a lot of people, and it was awesome. Like I was so excited. So the next time I gave a talk, and this was kind of like a trap, because all like I ended up doing it at the very end, last day. So all the time I was kind of nervous about doing the talk. I tried not to think too much for the days before the talk, so at least partially I had this nice experience. And right now, this current one, I think it's almost sold out. I'm not sure if it's so easy to get a ticket still, like probably possible. So if you can, I'd recommend that to anyone. If you can afford it, then you can travel to Amsterdam. If you won't be able to grab a ticket, you can just go visit Amsterdam and just come next to the venue, and there will be a lot of people talking in front of the venue, and we can just have this
And
beside the Blender conference experience. And
the
nice.
evening dinners are always kind of epic too. So there's always, it's it's a Blender event where eventually someone rips out a laptop and starts showing stuff in the middle of like pizza place. It's it's really kind of cool. And so yeah, there were actually, I have run into people, other Blender heads, who couldn't get into the conference, but like, I'm in Amsterdam, let's go hang out. And so they'll be like, you grab lunch or grab dinner or whatever with them, and that's totally do that. It's worth it.
Yeah, because the venue can only fit in so many people, and Amsterdam is really big, so
Yeah.
let's make it like the world event of Blender nerds.
There we go.
And maybe to sum this whole conversation up, like you had also, you've done a talk on the Blender conference Los Angeles. It was about how Blender is being used to making crazy stuff. You're an example of that, and you have like a lot of example. And so my final question would be like, what is like the craziest of them all, like that you think it's really unusual how Blender is being used?
There's so many. It's I don't know, like that's kind of the reason why I put together that talk at BCon LA, is because it's one just sort of piles on top of the other of all the different sort of different, and there are uses that I'm sure I don't know about that are like, you're using it for that. Like, I mean, the uh I think one of the things I still come back to, which is it's still kind of Blender adjacent, but when they were doing one of the open movie projects, French company Carnot uh, was offering render services to the Blender Foundation or Blender Institute for making that. And the way that they did it is they would take each render node and put it into like schools or hospitals or whatever as space heaters. And that still is one of those. I'm like, you're using media entertainment production to like heat these places, and it's because rendering gonna make your computer cook. You might as well use that heat for something. And so that one always struck me as like that's a cool use of all this time we spend waiting for cycles to get stuff done. That's a kind of a beneficial use. You talk about people, you see people who are using, we talk about uh, GPUs and all the different things they get used for now that aren't just graphics, right? They're using for general processing. They're using it for the crypto and AI and these sorts of things. And one of the conversations about it is like, how much power is that using, and where's that power going, and is it kind of not great ecologically and whatnot. And here's a use case where you're like, okay, it's generating heat. Let's make the best use of it. And so those sort of things are really cool. I think the other one I would say is where you use Blender to model prosthetics for people or animals. So they 3D printed a replacement beak for a macaw, or using it for planning like orthopedic surgeries. Those are like, I mean, this is a goofy little free piece of software, and they're using it for like the things that really strike me the most. I guess the things that um, aren't really media and entertainment. They're actually like very positively affecting lives in ways that we don't expect. That's really, those are the ones that strike me the most, because it's like, okay, I'm not just making cute little graphics. I'm not just making something jump around on the screen and serving as a distraction from what is an otherwise like boring and mundane existence. I'm actually, and I say I mean whoever's using Blender for these sorts of things, they're using it for stuff that has meaning and use and really affects people's lives. And those that's what always really grabs me, and always I look for that now. Whenever I go to a Blender conference, I look for the people who are doing those sorts of things.
Yeah, great. So maybe one more final question.
Sure.
Final, just like the render the file that you're working on. Final question.
Use version control.
What's yeah, what's the like goal that you are planning to use Blender for, like some kind of a dream project that you have maybe for the future, or something that you're already kind of thinking or tinkering?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a bunch of like, at this point, I'm enjoying a big part of the reason why I sort of accepted doing the consulting side of things is that I really enjoy helping people uh, make their thing. Could be entertainment, but it could be these other crazy things, right? I like being able to do that, and so being able to help facilitate those things with the experience that I have is it's actually it's more gratifying than I expected it to be. So that's one really big part of it that though I do have sort of floating off here in the back of my head. Like I said, I write fiction, and the fiction story that I wrote, it was originally designed as an animated series, and it's still written using that structure. Um, so were I to sort of prove it, but it's also kind of a weird genre. So, if were I to have the time, bandwidth, or cash, I might pursue making that story match its original design in terms of being animated. Um, I still have more to write on it though, so we'll see.
Yeah, Blender is a perfect tool for that, for sure.
Absolutely.
So I guess keeping fingers crossed on doing that project, and if you can also tell the audience where they can find anything about what you do, information about the fiction that you write, everything that you're doing,
Yeah, yeah.
where they can follow you.
So my home base is monsterjavaguns.com. That's actually, if you take Jason Van Gumster and rearrange all the letters, you can get Monster Java Guns, which for a lot of people is a lot easier to spell than Jason Van Gumster. But that has all the various social media places that you can find me. That said, I have been kind of radio silent for the last year or so, not on purpose. I've just been busy. I'm trying to work on being more present on the digital social medias, uh, because of all the fun things that are going on. I like sharing them, and I want to share them with other people as well. So you can find me there. But yeah, Monster Java Guns is the home base, and it links out to all the other crazy projects, be it Blender for Dummies, my pen name for my fiction, or even I think there's a link to the Functionally Homeless website that you did. So
All right, so we'll also leave the link in the show description, so you can all just click and find this information. It's just like it's just like having the Blender exe file, and click on it, and then you have all the workspaces
perfect.
for for animation modeling, compositing, video editing, whatever. So the menu is there for you to click on. So thank you again, Jason, for being on the show. It was a great conversation. I enjoyed it very much.
Thanks for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
Hopefully we'll be able to meet in person in one of the Blender conferences.
I'm planning on being there this year.
We'll see. I'm not sure myself if I'll be able this year to go there, but maybe I'm kind of like dreaming of going to the Beacon LA someday. Like I would like to see.
Well, then I better make sure that happens.
I've only been to States once,
Ah,
and it wasn't California. It was on the other coast, Florida. So
Florida.
generally,
I say it like that because I find myself in Florida every winter because the rest of the country is frozen.
Yeah, they at least they can use Blender for heating spaces. In Florida, it's you don't want any more heat.
No.
It's just the air conditioning.